Chapter 1. Stop reacting instantly. Most people lose control in the first 5 seconds. That's all it takes. 5 seconds of anger, 5 seconds of ego, 5 seconds of emotional reaction, and the damage is done. A relationship strained, an opportunity lost, a reputation weakened. Not because of the situation, but because of the reaction. Understand this clearly. Your first reaction is not your best response. It's automatic. It's emotional. It's conditioned. And if you keep living in that automatic state, you will keep getting automatic results. You have a choice. You can react like everyone else, or you can train yourself to pause. That pause is everything. That's the key. When something triggers you, a comment, a message, a moment of pressure, your brain wants speed. It wants to respond immediately, to defend, to attack, to prove. But speed is not power. Control is power. And control begins with one simple discipline. Do not react instantly. Pause. Even if it's just for 3 seconds. That pause interrupts the emotional chain reaction. That pause gives your mind time to catch up with your feelings. That pause is where strength is built. Think about the last time you overreacted. You said something you didn't mean. You escalated something small. You let emotion take control, and afterward, you regretted it. Not because the situation was impossible, but because you didn't give yourself time. Time to think. Time to choose. Time to respond instead of react. You have a choice, and most people waste it. Here's what you need to understand. Reaction is weakness. Response is strength. Reaction is instant. Response is intentional. Reaction is emotional. Response is controlled. Reaction is common. Response is rare. And rare is powerful. Let's make this practical. From this moment forward, you follow a rule. No immediate responses. Not to texts, not to criticism, not to conflict. You pause. You breathe. You create space. Because space gives you power. Someone disrespects you? Pause. Not because you're weak, but because you're in control. Someone criticizes you? Pause. Not because you agree, but because you choose your response carefully. Someone tries to provoke you? Pause. Because you refuse to be controlled by external forces. Repeat this to yourself. I control my response. Nothing controls me. Again, I control my response. Nothing controls me. That's the mindset. That's the standard. Here's the truth most people avoid. If someone can trigger you, they control you. Read that again. If a comment, a tone, or a situation can make you lose control, then you are not in charge. They are. And that should bother you. Because your emotional state should never be dictated by someone else's behavior. That's not power. That's dependency. So what do? You slow everything down. You stop rushing into reactions. You stop feeding emotional impulses. You start observing. You start thinking. You start choosing. It's not about suppressing emotion. It's about mastering it. That's the difference. Here's a simple exercise. For the next 24 hours, implement the 3-second rule. Before you respond to anything, you wait 3 seconds. A message, a comment, a request, a problem. 3 seconds. It sounds small, but it changes everything. Because in those 3 seconds, you interrupt the automatic version of yourself, and you activate the disciplined version. Discipline is not built in big moments. It's built in small decisions, over and over again. Pause, think, respond. Pause, think, respond. Repetition creates identity, and identity creates behavior. At first, it will feel unnatural. You'll want to react. You'll feel the urge. That's normal, because you've trained yourself for years to respond instantly. Now you're retraining your mind, and that takes effort. But every time you pause, you win. Every time you delay a reaction, you gain control. Every time you choose your response, you strengthen your discipline. Let's go deeper. Why do people react instantly? Because of ego. Because of insecurity. Because they feel the need to defend, prove, or validate themselves immediately. But here's the truth. You don't need to prove anything instantly. You don't need their permission. You don't need their validation. You don't need to win every moment. You need control. That's it. Control is quiet. Control is patient. Control is intentional. And control always beats chaos. When you stop reacting instantly, something powerful happens. You become unpredictable. People can't trigger you easily. They can't manipulate your emotions. They can't pull you into unnecessary conflict. Because you're no longer playing the same game. You've stepped out of it. And that's where real power begins. Not in dominating others, but in controlling yourself. Remember this: the person who controls their reaction controls the outcome. Always. No exceptions. So the next time you feel that emotional surge, anger, frustration, urgency.
Chapter 2. Control the story in your head. Every emotion you feel starts with a story. Not the event, not the person, not the situation. The story. That's what most people never understand. They think life happens and then emotions follow. Wrong. Life happens, you interpret it, and then the emotion follows. That's the chain. Event, meaning, emotion. And if you don't control the meaning, you will never control the emotion. That's the key. You have a choice. You can let your mind create automatic, negative stories, or you can take control and rewrite them. But understand this. Your brain is not designed to make you powerful. It's designed to keep you safe. And safe often means negative. It assumes the worst. It expects rejection. It prepares for failure. So when something happens, your default story is usually disempowering. She ignored me. I'm not important. I failed. I'm not good enough. They criticized me. I must be wrong. That's the pattern. And that pattern creates your emotional life. Repeat this. It's not the event. It's the meaning. Again, it's not the event. It's the meaning. Burn that into your mind. Because once you understand this, everything changes. Let's make it real. You send a message. No reply. What's the event? No response. That's it. But your mind doesn't stop there. It creates a story. They're ignoring me. They don't respect me. I said something wrong. Now what happens? Emotion, frustration, insecurity, overthinking. But none of that came from the event. It came from the meaning you assigned. Now flip it. Same event. No reply. New story. They're busy. They'll respond later. It's not urgent. Now what happens? Calm, patience, control. Same situation. Different story. Different emotion. You have a choice. Every single time. Let's go deeper. Rejection. This is where most people lose control. They take rejection personally. They let it define them. But rejection is just an event. You decide what it means. Most people choose this story. I wasn't good enough. And that story destroys them. It kills confidence. It creates hesitation. It builds fear. But that's not the only story available. Here's another. This wasn't a right fit. This is redirection. This is part of the process. Now the same rejection becomes fuel. Now it builds resilience. Now it sharpens focus. Now it strengthens identity. It's not about what happened. It's about what you decide it means. That's the difference between weak minds and strong minds. Weak minds accept the first story. Strong minds question it, rewrite it, control it. Here's the problem. Most people never question their thoughts. They assume, if I think it, it must be true. That's a dangerous mindset, because your thoughts are often biased, emotional, and incomplete. They're not facts. They are interpretations. And interpretations can be changed. So here's the discipline. Challenge every negative story. Every time your mind creates a disempowering narrative, you stop. And you ask, is this the only possible meaning? Most of the time, it's not. There's always another angle, a stronger angle, a more useful angle. Let's make this practical. Something goes wrong. Instead of reacting emotionally, you run this process. What actually happened? Fact. What story am I telling? Interpretation. What's a better story? Control. That's it. Simple, but powerful. Example. You make a mistake at work. Fact. You made an error. Story. I'm incompetent. Emotion. Anxiety. Self-doubt. Now change the story. This is feedback. This is how I improve. This is part of growth. Now the emotion changes. Confidence replaces fear. Focus replaces doubt. You have a choice. Always. Here's another truth. Your brain will repeat whatever story you feed it. If you constantly tell yourself negative stories, your mind will default to negativity. If you train yourself to find empowering meanings, your mind will adapt. That's how conditioning works. Repetition creates belief. Belief creates behavior. So you must become intentional. You must choose your narratives carefully. Not fake positivity. Not delusion. Controlled interpretation. There's a difference. You're not ignoring reality. You're choosing the most useful version of it. Repeat this. I control the meaning. I control the emotion. Again, I control the meaning. I control the emotion. This is how you take power back. Let's address something important. This is not easy because your old patterns are strong. You've been thinking a certain way for years, reacting a certain way, interpreting things automatically. But that doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you're trained. And what's trained can be retrained. Every time you catch a negative story and rewrite it, you win. Every time you shift your interpretation, you build control. Every time you choose a stronger meaning, you strengthen your mind. And over time, something powerful happens. Your default changes. You stop assuming the worst. You stop taking everything personally. You stop creating unnecessary emotional chaos. Because your mind is no longer working against you. It's working for you. That's when emotional control becomes natural. Not forced. Not temporary. But automatic. Remember, it's not the event, it's the meaning. Never forget that. Because that one principle can change your entire life. You've learned to pause. Now you've learned to control the story. You're no longer reacting blindly. You're thinking. You're choosing. But there's another trap that destroys emotional control. The need to win. To prove. To be right in every moment. And that need will cost you everything if you don't control it. So now it's time to let go. Chapter 3. Detach from the need to win every moment. Most people are addicted to winning. Not real winning. Not long-term winning. Momentary winning. Being right in the argument. Getting the last word. Proving a point. Defending their ego. And in the process, they lose everything that actually matters. Their peace. Their focus. Their control. Understand this clearly. Not every battle deserves your energy. That's the truth. But most people don't live by it. They react to everything. They engage in everything. They fight every small war that appears in front of them. And they call it strength. It's not strength. It's lack of control. You have a choice. You could try to win every moment, or you can stay in control. But you cannot do both. That's the key. Repeat this. You don't need to win. You need to stay in control. Again, you don't need to win. You need to stay in control. Burn that into your thinking. Because this is where emotional maturity begins. Let's be honest. Why do you feel the need to win? Why do you need to prove your point? Why do you feel uncomfortable walking away? Ego. That's it. Your ego wants validation. Your ego wants dominance. Your ego wants to be right. But your ego is not your ally. It's your biggest liability. Because it pulls you into battles that don't matter. Think about the last argument you had. What are you really fighting for? Understanding? Growth? Resolution? Or were you fighting to be right? To win? To prove something? Most of the time, it's the second. And what did it cost you? Time, energy, peace, maybe even the relationship itself. Here's the truth. Winning the argument often means losing the bigger picture. You prove your point, but damage the connection. You get the last word, but lose respect. You dominate the moment, but destroy long-term trust. That's not winning. That's short-term ego satisfaction. Real power is different. Real power is walking away when you could engage. Real power is staying silent when you could react. Real power is choosing peace over proving a point. Example, someone challenges you aggressively. They raise their voice. They push your buttons. They try to pull you into conflict. Your instinct? Fight back. Match their energy. Defend yourself. Win the exchange. But what if you didn't? What if you paused and chose not to engage? What if you said nothing? Or simply walked away? Most people would call that weakness. They're wrong. That is strategic dominance. Because in that moment, you made a decision. I will not be controlled. You didn't let their emotions become yours. You didn't let their behavior dictate your response. You stayed in control. That's power. You have a choice. Engage in every battle or select your battles carefully. Because every time you engage, you pay a price. Energy is limited. Focus is limited. And if you waste it on meaningless conflicts, you'll have nothing left for what actually matters. Let's go deeper. Attachment is the problem. You are attached to being right, attached to being respected, attached to being understood. And that attachment creates emotional reactions. Because when those things are threatened, you react, you defend, you fight. But detachment changes everything. Detachment says, I don't need to prove anything. I don't need validation in this moment. I don't need to win this. And when you remove that need, you remove the emotional charge. Detachment creates clarity. You start seeing situations for what they are. Not personal attacks, not threats to your identity, just moments, temporary situations that don't define you. Attachment creates chaos. You take everything personally. You overreact. You escalate because you feel like something is at stake. But most of the time, nothing is. Repeat this. I don't need to win this moment. Again, I don't need to win this moment. That sentence alone will save you from countless unnecessary conflicts. Let's make this practical. From now on, before you engage in any argument, ask yourself one question. Does this actually matter? Not to your ego, to your life, to your goals, to your long-term direction. If the answer is no, walk away. Stay silent. Let it go. This is not avoidance. This is discipline. There's a difference. Avoidance comes from fear. Discipline comes from control. You're not running away. You're choosing not to engage. Another rule. If it won't matter in a week, don't give it more than a minute. Think about that. Most arguments, most conflicts, most emotional reactions, they don't matter long-term. But people treat them like life or death situations. And they lose control because of it. You don't need their permission. You don't need their agreement. You don't need their validation. You need control. That's it. When you master this, something shifts. You become harder to provoke, harder to manipulate, harder to pull into drama. Because you're no longer reacting to every stimulus. You're choosing your responses carefully. And people will notice. They'll feel it. Your presence becomes calmer, stronger, more controlled. Because you're not chasing small victories. You're focused on bigger outcomes. Remember, not every battle deserves your energy. Say it again. You don't need to win. You need to stay in control. This is how you protect your peace. This is how you maintain focus. This is how you build emotional strength. Because at the end of the day, it's not about winning arguments. It's about mastering yourself. And every time you choose control over ego, you win where it actually counts. You've learned to pause. You've learned to control your thoughts. Now you've learned to let go of unnecessary battles. But there's another level to this. Because it's not enough to avoid chaos. You must become stable, consistent, unshaken. Chapter 4. Make calm your default state. Most people think calm is something you either have or you don't. They call it personality. They say, I'm just not a calm person. That's a lie. Calm is not a personality trait. Calm is a trained response. And anything that is trained can be built. That's the key. Right now, your reactions are conditioned. If you panic under pressure, that's conditioning. If you get anxious quickly, that's conditioning. If you lose control in stressful moments, that's conditioning. You weren't born that way. You trained it, repeated it, reinforced it, and now it feels automatic. But here's the truth. You can retrain your response. You can build calm the same way you built stress. Through repetition, through exposure, through discipline. You have a choice. You can keep reacting the same way under pressure, or you can train yourself to stay calm. But understand this. Calm does not come from comfort. It comes from pressure. That's where most people get it wrong. They try to feel calm by avoiding stress, avoiding difficulty, avoiding discomfort, and that only makes them weaker. Because the moment pressure shows up, they break. Calm is built in the storm, not outside of it. Look at high performers, athletes in the final seconds of a game, surgeons in critical operations, leaders making decisions in chaos. Do they panic? No, they execute. Not because they don't feel pressure, but because they've trained themselves to stay calm inside it. They've been there before, again and again. They've faced pressure so many times that it no longer controls them. That's the difference. Repeat this. Calm is power. Calm is control. Calm is rare. Again, calm is power. Calm is control. Calm is rare. This is your standard now. Let's break it down. Why is calm so powerful? Because when you're calm, you think clearly. When you're calm, you make better decisions. When you're calm, you don't waste energy on emotion. You direct it into action. When you're not calm, you rush. You overthink. You react. And that leads to mistakes. So the goal is simple. Make calm your default state. Not something you access occasionally. Not something you rely on when things get extreme. But your baseline. Your standard. And that only happens through training. Here's how you start. You deliberately put yourself in controlled discomfort. Not chaos. Not overwhelm. Controlled pressure. Example. Cold showers. Simple. Uncomfortable. Controlled. Your body reacts instantly. Tension. Resistance. Stress. But instead of escaping, you stay. You breathe. You relax. You train your body to stay calm in discomfort. Another example. Difficult conversations. Instead of avoiding them, you lean into them. But this time, you control your tone. You slow your speech. You stay grounded, even when the other person isn't. That's training. Another example. High-pressure situations at work. Deadlines. Mistakes. Unexpected problems. Most people panic. You don't. You slow down. You focus on the next step. You stay calm while others lose control. Because you've trained for this. You don't rise to the moment. You fall to your training. That's the truth. So, if you've trained stress, you will default to stress. If you've trained calm, you will default to calm. You have a choice. Every situation is training. Every moment of pressure is an opportunity to react or to reinforce calm. Let's make this practical. From now on, when you feel pressure, you follow this rule. Slow everything down. Your breathing, your speech, your movements. Speed creates panic. Slowness creates control. When your heart rate rises, you breathe deeper. When your thoughts race, you focus on one thing. When chaos appears, you simplify. That's how calm is built. And at first, it will feel unnatural. Your body will want to react. Your mind will want to rush. But you don't follow that impulse. You override it. Repeat this. I stay calm, no matter what. Again, I stay calm, no matter what. This is identity, not just behavior. Because when calm becomes who you are, you don't have to force it. It becomes automatic. Here's what happens when you master this. People trust you more because you're stable. People respect you more because you don't break under pressure. People rely on you because when things go wrong, you stay right. That's rare. That's powerful. And internally, everything changes. You stop feeling overwhelmed. You stop overreacting. You stop losing control because your baseline is different. Remember, calm is not the absence of pressure. It's control within it. Most people are controlled by their environment. You will not be. You will control your response, no matter the situation. Repeat it one more time. Calm is power. Calm is control. Calm is rare. You've learned to pause. You've learned to control your thoughts. You've learned to detach from unnecessary battles. Now you're building emotional stability. But there's another layer. Because even if you're calm, you can still lose control if you take everything personally. And most people do. They internalize everything. They make everything about themselves. And that's where emotional weakness begins. So now, it's time to eliminate that. Chapter 5. Stop taking things personally. Most of your emotional pain is self-created. Not because of what happened, but because of how you made it about yourself. That's the truth. And most people don't want to hear it. Someone ignores you. You think, they don't respect me. Someone criticizes you. You think, there's something wrong with me. Someone is in a bad mood. You think, I did something. You see the pattern? You take neutral situations and turn them into personal attacks. And that's where emotional instability begins. Understand this clearly. Most things are not about you, but your ego makes them feel personal. That's the key. You have a choice. You can interpret everything through your ego, or you can step back and see reality for what it is. Repeat this. It's not about me. It's about the situation. Again, it's not about me. It's about the situation. This single shift will give you more emotional freedom than almost anything else. Let's break it down. Why do you take things personally? Because your identity is fragile. Because your ego is involved. Because you feel the need to protect how you're perceived. So when something happens, your mind asks, what does this mean about me? And that question creates problems. Because now everything becomes a reflection of your worth. But here's the truth. Not everything is a reflection of you. In fact, most things aren't. Example, someone criticizes your work. Your default reaction? Defensive, hurt, triggered. Because you interpret it as, I'm not good enough. But what if that's not what it means? What if it simply means they have a different perspective? They see something you don't. They're expressing their opinion. That's it. No attack. No insult. No judgment of your worth. Just information. But your ego doesn't like that. It wants to protect. It wants to defend. It wants to react. And that reaction creates emotional chaos. You have a choice. You can react to protect your ego, or you can stay calm and evaluate the situation objectively. Let's go deeper. People operate based on their own experiences, their own emotions, their own insecurities. So when they speak, act, or react, it's coming from them, not you. Someone is rude, that reflects their state, not your value. Someone dismisses you, that reflects their priorities, not your worth. Someone criticizes you harshly, that reflects their communication, not your identity. Repeat this. Their behavior is about them, not me. Again, their behavior is about them, not me. This is how you detach emotionally, because when you take things personally, you give people control over your emotional state. They say something, you feel something. They act a certain way, you react. You become dependent on external behavior. That's not control. That's vulnerability. But when you stop taking things personally, everything changes. You observe instead of absorb. You analyze instead of react. You stay grounded instead of triggered. Let's make this practical. Next time something triggers you, ask, is this really about me? Most of the time, the answer is no. And even if it is, you still have a choice in how you respond. Another rule, separate feedback from identity. Feedback is about behavior. Identity is about who you are. Do not confuse the two. You made a mistake? That's behavior. It does not define your identity. Someone points it out? That's information, not an attack. This is how strong minds operate. They extract value from situations without attaching emotion unnecessarily. Weak minds do the opposite. They personalize everything. They react emotionally. They create problems that don't exist. You don't do that anymore. Not after this. You don't need their approval. You don't need their validation. You don't need to be liked by everyone. That's not the goal. The goal is control. And control comes from perspective. Here's another truth. When you stop taking things personally, you become harder to manipulate. Because manipulation depends on emotional reactions. If someone can trigger you, they can control you. But if you remain unaffected, they lose that power. That's strength. Quiet strength. Repeat it again. It's not about me. It's about the situation. Lock that in. At first, it will feel unnatural. You'll still feel the urge to react, to defend, to internalize. But you don't act on it. You pause. You reframe. You detach. Over time, it becomes automatic. You stop overthinking. You stop assuming. You stop creating unnecessary emotional weight. And your mind becomes lighter, clearer, stronger. Remember, not everything deserves your emotional investment. Be selective. Protect your energy. Stay focused. Because the moment you stop taking everything personally, you take your power back. You've learned to pause. You've learned to control your thoughts. You've learned to detach from unnecessary battles. You've learned to stay calm. And now, you've stopped making everything about you. But there's another level. Because emotional control is not just about avoiding triggers. It's about building strength. Deliberately. Daily. Through discomfort. Because comfort does not create control. Pressure does. So now it's time to train. Chapter 6. Train yourself in discomfort daily. Most people want emotional control, but they avoid the one thing that builds it. Discomfort. They run from pressure. They avoid stress. They stay in what's easy, familiar, predictable. and then they wonder why they fall apart when life gets hard. Understand this. Emotional control is not built in comfort. It is built in discomfort. That's the key. You have a choice. You can keep avoiding pressure, or you can train yourself inside it. But you cannot do both. Repeat this. I don't avoid pressure. I train in it. Again, I don't avoid pressure. I train in it. This is your new mindset. Let's be clear. Comfort feels good, but comfort makes you weak, because comfort requires nothing from you. No control, no discipline, no growth. Discomfort is different. Discomfort demands control. It forces you to face resistance. It exposes your weaknesses. And that's exactly why you need it. Think about it. If you never face stress, how will you learn to stay calm under pressure? If you never feel discomfort, how will you learn to control your reactions? If you never challenge yourself, how will you build discipline? You won't. That's why most people stay stuck. They live in comfort and collapse in pressure. You don't do that anymore. You train daily. Let's make this practical. You don't wait for life to test you. You test yourself. Start small. Controlled discomfort. Every day. Example 1. Cold exposure. A cold shower. Simple. Controlled. Uncomfortable. Your body reacts immediately. Tension. Resistance. Shock. Your instinct. Get out. Avoid it. Escape. But you don't. You stay. You breathe. You relax into the discomfort. You train your nervous system to stay calm under stress. That's not about the cold. It's about control. Example 2. Difficult conversations. Most people avoid them. They delay. They ignore. They hope problems disappear. But they don't. They grow. You do the opposite. You lean in. You face the conversation. But this time with control. You don't raise your voice. You don't react emotionally. You stay calm, even if the other person isn't. That's training. Example 3. Discipline routines. Waking up early. Working when you don't feel like it. Staying consistent when motivation is gone. That's discomfort. And most people quit. You don't. You show up anyway. Because you understand. Discipline is built when you don't feel like doing it. Not when it's easy. Repeat this. I don't do what's easy. I do what builds me. Again, I don't do what's easy. I do what builds me. Let's go deeper. Discomfort rewires your brain. Every time you face something difficult and stay in control, you prove to yourself, I can handle this. And that belief compounds. At first, it's small. A cold shower. A hard task. An uncomfortable moment. But over time, it builds confidence. Real confidence. Not fake motivation. Not temporary hype. Earn confidence. Because you've experienced pressure and you didn't break. That's how emotional strength is built. Not by avoiding difficulty, but by facing it repeatedly. You have a choice. Run for discomfort or grow through it. Here's the truth. Life will bring pressure anyway. Unexpected problems. Stressful situations. Moments that test you. You cannot avoid that. So the question is, will you be ready? Or will you react the way you always have? Training prepares you. Avoidance weakens you. Another rule. Do one uncomfortable thing every day. Just one. It doesn't have to be extreme, but it must challenge you. Make the call you've been avoiding. Start the task you've been delaying. Put yourself in a situation that requires control. And when you feel resistance, that's where the growth is. Most people stop at resistance. You push through it. Calmly. Deliberately. With control. Because it's not about suffering. It's about training. Repeat this. Discomfort is my training ground. Again, discomfort is my training ground. Over time, something powerful happens. What used to feel hard becomes normal. What used to stress you becomes manageable. What used to trigger you no longer affects you the same way. Because you've adapted, you've trained, you've grown. And now, when real pressure hits, you don't panic. You don't freeze. You don't react. You execute. That's the difference. Most people wait for life to force them into growth. You choose it daily. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need motivation. You don't need permission. You need discipline. Because discipline creates control. And control creates power. Remember, emotional control is built in discomfort. Never forget that. You learn to pause. You've learned to control your thoughts. You've learned to detach. You've learned to stay calm. You stop taking things personally. And now, you're training yourself under pressure. But there's another skill, a quiet one, a powerful one that most people underestimate because they think power comes from speaking, when sometimes it comes from saying nothing at all. Now it's time to master that. Chapter 7. Master the Power of Silence. Most people talk too much. They explain too much. They defend too quickly. They react out loud without thinking. And every time they do that, they give away their power. Understand this. Silence is one of the strongest emotional responses you can use. But most people are uncomfortable with it. They feel the need to fill every gap, to respond immediately, to justify themselves, because silence feels like weakness to them. It feels like losing, but that's because they don't understand it. Repeat this. Silence is not weakness, it's strategy. Again, silence is not weakness, it's strategy. That's the key. Silence creates space, and space creates control. When you speak too quickly, you reveal emotion. You expose insecurity. You give others something to react to. But when you stay silent, you observe. You think. You choose your response carefully. You have a choice. You can react with words, or you can respond with silence. Let's be clear. Silence is not avoidance. It's not fear. It's not passivity. It's control. In conflict, silence is power. Because the person who speaks less often controls more. Think about it. Two people arguing. One is loud, emotional, reactive. The other is calm, quiet, controlled. Who has the power? The one who is not reacting. The one who is not chasing the conversation. The one who is choosing when and if to speak. Because silence does something powerful. It forces the other person to fill the gap, to reveal more, to expose their emotions, while you stay grounded, observing, thinking, in control. Example, someone tries to provoke you. They expect a reaction. They expect you to respond emotionally, to match their energy. But you don't. You pause. You say nothing. Or you respond minimally, calmly, without emotion. What happens? They lose momentum. They become uncertain because their strategy depends on your reaction, and you didn't give it to them. That's control. Most people don't realize this. The more you speak emotionally, the less control you have, because you're reacting, not choosing. Silence breaks that pattern. Another example. Someone challenges you in a conversation, questions your opinion, pushes for a response. Your instinct? Defend, explain, prove your point. But what if you didn't? What if you paused and simply said less? Or nothing at all? Now the dynamic shifts. You're no longer chasing validation. You're not trying to win. You're in control of your presence. And that presence carries weight. You don't need to explain everything. You don't need to respond to everything. You don't need to prove yourself in every moment. You don't need their permission. Silence communicates something powerful. Confidence, control, clarity. Because when you're truly confident, you don't feel the need to constantly speak. Let's go deeper. Why are people afraid of silence? Because silence feels uncomfortable. It creates tension. It forces awareness. And most people are not comfortable with that. So they talk. They fill the space. They escape the discomfort. But you don't escape it. You use it. Silence becomes your tool. In conversations, you pause before responding. You think before speaking. You choose your words carefully. And when you do speak, your words carry more weight because they are intentional, not reactive. That's the difference. Another rule. Not every thought deserves to be spoken. Think about that. Most of what people say is unnecessary, emotional, reactive, impulsive. You filter, you refine, you reduce, because less is more. Repeat this. I speak less, but with purpose. Again, I speak less, but with purpose. This is how you build authority, not by talking more, but by talking better. And sometimes, by not talking at all. Silence also protects your energy. Every unnecessary conversation, every pointless argument, every emotional reaction, it drains you. But when you choose silence, you conserve that energy. You stay focused. You stay grounded. You don't get pulled into chaos. That's discipline. You have a choice. Engage in every conversation or choose when to speak. Because attention is power. and where you place it matters. When you master silence, you become harder to read, harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, because you're no longer predictable. And that unpredictability creates strength. Remember, silence is not about saying nothing. It's about saying only what matters. And often, what matters most is restraint. Repeat it again. Silence is not weakness, it's strategy. When you apply this consistently, everything changes. Your communication improves. Your presence strengthens. Your emotional control deepens. Because you're no longer reacting out loud. You are choosing your responses. You've learned to pause. You've learned to control your thoughts. You've learned to detach. You've learned to stay calm. You stop taking things personally. You've trained in discomfort. And now, you've mastered silence. But there's still something deeper. Because even with all this control, there's still triggers, patterns, things that push your buttons instantly. And if you don't identify them, they will always control you. So now it's time to eliminate them. Chapter 8. Eliminate emotional triggers. There are things that control you. You may not want to admit it, but they exist. Certain words, certain people, certain situations, they trigger you instantly. No pause, no control, just reaction. And every time that happens, you lose. Understand this clearly. Anything that triggers you controls you. That's the truth. And most people are controlled all day long. By opinions, by criticism, by disrespect, by unexpected situations. They think they're in control, but they're not. They're reacting to everything. You have a choice. You can stay controlled by your triggers, or you can eliminate their power. That's the key. Repeat this. Nothing controls me unless I allow it. Again, nothing controls me unless I allow it. This is your standard now. Let's break it down. A trigger is not the problem. The reaction is. Someone criticizes you. That's the trigger. You feel anger. You react. You lose control. But the criticism itself? It's neutral. It's just words. The power comes from your response. So if you want control, you don't avoid triggers. You train for them. That's where most people get it wrong. They try to eliminate discomfort. Avoid certain people. Avoid certain situations. Avoid anything that might trigger them. But avoidance is weakness. Because the moment you face that trigger again, you react the same way. You don't avoid. You prepare. Example, criticism triggers you. It makes you defensive, angry, reactive. So what do? You expect it. You train for it. You tell yourself, criticism will come. People will have opinions. I will not react emotionally. Now, when it happens, you're ready. You pause. You observe. You stay calm. That's control. Awareness is the first step. You need to identify your triggers. Ask yourself, what situations make me lose control? What words affect me instantly? What behaviors from others trigger emotional reactions? Be honest, because you cannot fix what you don't see. Once you identify them, you train for them. You don't wait for the moment to figure it out. You prepare in advance. You visualize the situation. You imagine the trigger, and you rehearse your response. Calm, controlled, intentional. This is mental training, and it works. Because when the real moment happens, it's not new. You've seen it before. You've practiced it. And instead of reacting, you execute. Repeat this. I expect the trigger, and I control the response. Again, I expect the trigger, and I control the response. Let's go deeper. Triggers are patterns, learned behaviors, conditioned responses. At some point, you reacted emotionally to something, and your brain stored that pattern. Now, every time that situation appears, your brain repeats the response automatically. But automatic does not mean permanent. It can be changed through awareness, through repetition, through discipline. Every time you face a trigger and stay in control, you weaken the old pattern and build a new one. Over time, that trigger loses its power. What used to make you angry now feels neutral. What used to stress you now feels manageable. What used to control you now has no effect. That's freedom, but it requires effort, consistency, discipline. You have a choice. React the way you always have, or retrain your response. Another rule, do not label yourself by your triggers. Don't say, I'm just an angry person. I'm just sensitive. That's just how I am. No, that's not identity. That's conditioning. And conditioning can be changed. You are not your reactions. You're the one who chooses them. You don't need their permission. You don't need the situation to change. You need control. And control comes from preparation. Remember, triggers don't disappear, but their power does. When you stop reacting, when you stay calm, when you choose your response, you break the cycle. Repeat it again. Nothing controls me unless I allow it. This is how you take your power back. You've learned to pause. You've learned to control your thoughts. You've learned to detach. You've learned to stay calm. You stop taking things personally. You've trained in discomfort. You've mastered silence. And now, you've eliminated the power of triggers. But there's one final layer. Because even with all this control, you still need precision. You need to respond, not just calmly, but correctly, logically, intentionally. Because calm without direction is not enough. You must think clearly, act deliberately, and make decisions that serve you long term. So now it's time to refine that. Chapter 9. Respond with logic, not emotion. Emotions are fast. That's their nature. They show up instantly. They demand action. They push you to respond without thinking. And most people obey. They feel something and they act on it immediately. Anger? They react. Fear? They hesitate. Excitement? They rush. And then they deal with the consequences later. Understand this. Emotions are fast, but they are not always accurate. That's the problem. They're signals, not instructions. You have a choice. You can act on emotion, or you can slow down and think. That's the key. Repeat this. Slow down. Think. Then act. Again. Slow down. Think. Then act. This is your new operating system. Let's break it down. Why do emotions fail you? Because they are immediate. They don't analyze. They don't evaluate. They don't consider long-term consequences. They react to the moment. Logic is different. Logic takes time. Logic asks questions. Logic considers outcomes. And that's what creates precision. Your goal is not speed. Your goal is accuracy. Because a fast, emotional decision is often the wrong one. Think about business. Someone sends a message you don't like. Maybe it's criticism. Maybe it's rejection. Maybe it's disrespect. Your emotional response? Fire back. Defend yourself. Prove them wrong. But what happens when you do that? You damage relationships. You lose opportunities. You make decisions you regret. Now apply logic. You pause. You analyze. You ask, what is the best outcome here? What response serves me long term? What actually matters? Now your response changes. It becomes controlled, strategic, effective. That's the difference. Emotion reacts to the moment. Logic responds for the future. You have a choice. Short-term reaction or long-term result. Most people choose the moment. That's why they stay stuck. You don't. Let's go deeper. Emotions are not the enemy. They have value. They signal what you care about. They highlight what matters. But they are not decision makers. You feel them. You acknowledge them. But you don't obey them. That's discipline. Repeat this. I feel emotion, but I follow logic. Again, I feel emotion, but I follow logic. Let's make this practical. A situation happens. You feel an emotional reaction. Instead of acting immediately, you run a process. Step 1. Pause. Always. No exceptions. Step 2. Identify the emotion. What are you feeling? Anger? Fear? Frustration? Step 3. Ask, what is the logical response? Not the emotional one, the effective one. Step 4. Act with control. That's it. Simple, but powerful. Example, you receive negative feedback. Emotion says, defend yourself. Logic says, evaluate the feedback. What can I learn? What is useful here? What improves me? Now the same situation becomes growth. Another example, you face a setback. Emotion says, give up. Logic says, adjust strategy. What went wrong? What can I change? What's the next move? Now the setback becomes progress. You see the pattern? Emotion limits. Logic expands. You have a choice. Here's another truth. Emotional decisions are often temporary. Logical decisions are sustainable. Think long term. Always. Because every decision you make builds your future. And if your decisions are based on emotion, your future will be unstable. But if your decisions are based on logic, your future will be solid. That's how you build control. Another rule: if the emotion is high, delay the decision. Never decide when you're angry. Never commit when you're overwhelmed. Never react when you're triggered. Wait. Let the emotion pass. Then think clearly, because clarity comes after emotion, not during it. Repeat this: I don't decide in emotion, I decide in clarity. Again, I don't decide in emotion, I decide in clarity. This is how strong minds operate. They don't rush. They don't react. They don't let feelings dictate outcomes. They think. They analyze. They act with precision. And that precision creates results. You don't need to be the fastest. You need to be the most accurate, because accuracy wins over time. Always. Remember, slow down, think, then act. That's how you eliminate regret. That's how you improve decisions. That's how you stay in control. You've learned to pause. You've learned to control your thoughts. You've learned to detach. You've learned to stay calm. You stop taking things personally. You've trained in discomfort. You've mastered silence. You've eliminated triggers. And now, you respond with logic. But there's one final piece. Because all of this only works if it becomes who you are, not something you try occasionally, not something you remember sometimes. It must become your identity. Because when it's your identity, it's automatic. So now, we finish with the foundation of everything. Chapter 10. Build an unbreakable emotional identity. Everything you've learned so far means nothing if it's not who you are, not something you try, not something you remember sometimes, not something you apply only when it's convenient. It must become your identity. That's the final level. Because in moments of pressure, you don't think, you don't analyze, you don't search for the right strategy. You default. You fall back on who you are. And if your identity is weak, your reactions will be weak. If your identity is inconsistent, your behavior will be inconsistent. That's the truth most people avoid. They want control without changing who they are. But behavior follows identity. Always. You have a choice. You can keep reacting based on old patterns, or you could define a new standard for yourself. Repeat this: I don't rise to the moment, I fall to my training. Again, I don't rise to the moment, I fall to my training. This is the foundation. Let's make it clear. If you haven't decided who you are under pressure, the moment will decide for you. And the moment is emotional, unpredictable, reactive. That's why people break, because they rely on the situation instead of relying on identity. You don't do that anymore. You decide in advance. Who are you when things go wrong? Who are you when you're challenged? Who are you when emotions rise? You answer that now, not later, not in the moment. Now, example: I am calm. I am controlled. I do not react. Simple, clear, non-negotiable. This is not affirmation. This is identity programming. Because when you repeat something consistently and back it with action, it becomes real. Let's go deeper. Identity removes decision fatigue. If your identity is unclear, every situation becomes question. Should I react? Should I stay calm? What should I do? That hesitation creates inconsistency. But when your identity is clear, there's no question. You don't ask if you should stay calm. You are calm. You don't ask if you should react. You don't react. It's automatic. That's power. You have a choice. Live reactively or live by design. Let's make this practical. You create your emotional identity, and you repeat it daily. Not casually, not occasionally, daily. You say it. You think it. You act on it. I am calm under pressure. I think before I act. I stay in control at all times. And then, you prove it. Because identity without action is meaningless. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you reinforce the identity. Every time you stay calm under pressure, you strengthen it. Every time you choose logic over emotion, you confirm it. Repetition builds belief. Belief builds identity. Identity drives behavior. That's the cycle. And once that cycle is strong, everything becomes easier. You don't struggle to stay calm. You don't fight to control emotions. You don't force discipline. It's who you are. Repeat this. This is who I am now. Again, this is who I am now. Let's go even deeper. An unbreakable identity is not situational. You don't stay calm only when it's easy. You stay calm when it's hard. You don't stay controlled only when things go your way. You stay controlled when they don't. Because identity does not change with conditions. That's what makes it unbreakable. Most people are conditional. They are calm until they're triggered. They're disciplined until they're tired. They are focused until they're distracted. You are not. You are consistent because your identity is stronger than the situation. And that's where real control lives. You don't need motivation. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need external validation. You have identity, and identity is enough. Remember, you don't rise to the moment. You fall to your training. So train your identity every day, because when pressure comes, and it will, you won't panic. You won't react. You won't lose control. You will respond calmly, clearly, powerfully, because that's who you are. You learn to pause. You've learned to control your thoughts. You've learned to detach. You've learned to stay calm. You've stopped taking things personally. You've trained in discomfort. You've mastered silence. You've eliminated triggers. You've learned to think logically. And now, you've become someone who cannot be shaken. This is not temporary. This is not situational. This is identity. And from this point forward, everything changes because you are no longer trying to control your emotions. You have mastered them. This is what most people will never understand. Emotional control is not something you turn on when life gets hard. It is something you build every single day. Every pause you take, every reaction you stop, every moment you choose calm over chaos, you are rewriting who you are. Weak people react. Average people regret. Strong people respond. And from this moment forward, you're no longer reacting. You are pausing. You are thinking. You are choosing. Because when you control your emotions, you control the outcome. When you control the outcome, you control your life. So here is your challenge. For the next 24 hours, do not react to anything immediately. Not one message. Not one comment. Not one situation. Pause. Breathe. Decide. And remember this. You either master your emotions or they will master you. The choice is yours.